Ignore the supervisor back there. Look, toward the end of my last marriage, I was in such bad shape emotionally that I had a nervous breakdown. Now, my therapist wanted to admit me against my will. She wanted me in-house. That's how bad it was. I was able to talk her into not locking me up like that, but to let me do this whole thing outpatient. I was off work for up to 8 weeks, and I was in and out of that therapy. I had to go back and forth 2 or 3 times a week, and I was in a lot of groups. Well, during the initial analysis, he was talking about what's your life been, yada, 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 and I must have made the mistake of telling this guy that I had suffered several rapes. Well, next thing I know, he's putting me in a trauma group. Now, I'm there because I need somebody to help me to get my act together about this hellacious marriage so I can freaking function. I wasn't understanding why he was putting me into a trauma group. Now, I went on to the trauma group. Look, I was in our groups the whole time, but I'm just saying that I probably didn't have the best attitude. When I asked him, why are you putting me in a trauma group? This is not that deep. He said, because you've got rape in your background. Now, to me, that rape didn't have anything to do with the price of beans in China. I wanted to get my act together so I could go back to work and function in this marriage. I wasn't thinking about a doggone rape from some 30 years ago. What is this trauma group going to do for me? Now, I told you that story as an example of how we normalize trauma in our lives. I was talking to a young lady the other day, and I had been talking to her off and on over a couple of years. And I had suggested to her that based on her background, she might be suffering from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, she did listen, and she went to some of the people I suggested to her on YouTube. And she said, I'm just not making the connection, Linda. So she and I went back through some things that went on in her life, and they did fit the cPTSD scenario. But to her, it wasn't that bad. I didn't have any trauma. Things like being molested by a cousin, waking up with the uncle in bed with her, that kind of abuse. I remember something about a situation where she was being chased or moving around a lot as a child, divorce in the household. Now, all of that can add up to a cPTSD experience, especially when it happens in childhood. But to her, it was nothing. To me, the rape was nothing. I had stuffed it. I hadn't dealt with it, but I'm thinking it's not trauma because I had processed it as if, well, I was still dealing with the fact that I thought I deserved it. That's another story for another time. But at the same time, I had stuffed it so much and normalized it in my head to the point where I didn't really think it mattered. It wasn't traumatic. It wasn't that bad. There are other people out there who have been through worse. We need to get a more objective viewpoint about our childhood experiences, about our adult experiences, about our traumatic experiences. Now, I'll tell you how much of an epiphany this was for me. I was speaking with a literary agent, and we were bouncing around the idea of this book, The Shoe Fits. And she said that she would like for me to go into what trauma was. Now, I pushed back saying, well, this book is not directed at people who need to be taught about trauma. This is directed at people who have been through trauma. They already know what it is, but I was so wrong. I was so wrong. Just the fact that I had normalized several rapes in my life to the point where I didn't think that it had anything to do with how I was processing my current life. And so it may be with many of you. We are strong people. We have to have been strong in order to have survived the trauma we went through. But we normalize it. I've had women tell me who had been molested as kids that, well, I don't think that it was really trauma because my body responded to it. I enjoyed it. Well, then with that comes the false shame. Look, there's two different things here, you guys. Your human body is designed to respond to sexual stimulation. Just because your body will respond to that does not mean that you deserved it, that you were able to push it away, that you knew enough as a child to even view it as abuse. You probably felt like it was wrong, but you're also dealing with these threats that if you tell, then I'll this and I'll that, or you got the nerve to tell an adult who poo-pooed you away and tried to shove it under the carpet, which adds to your false shame. So I'm going to give you a list of things that are traumatic events that if you have suffered or survived it, you may still have residual traumatic repercussions in your current life. Now, bear with me here because I am looking at a list. If you've ever been through natural disasters such as tornado or hurricane or fire or flood, that's a traumatic event. If you've experienced sexual assault, that's traumatic. Physical assault, that's traumatic. If you've witnessed a shooting or stabbing or witnessed someone being killed, you may qualify for having had a traumatic history. Sudden death of a parent or a trusted caregiver. Hospitalization, especially long term. Now, that's something I never thought about. My hiney was in and out of the hospital, looks like every year from the age of 3 to 6. I remember being in oxygen tents, being in the hospital for long periods of time. And then I was born with a birth defect of my hands that I had 2 childhood operations for that. I had my tonsils and adenoids taken out, and I was always with pneumonia. So, hey, look, I never even chalked that up as being traumatic. But I went through that, and I've normalized that to the point where I didn't view it in my adulthood and in hindsight as trauma. Any physical pain or injury, such as having a car accident, serious illness, war, terrorism, rape, domestic violence, domestic abuse, incarceration within the criminal justice system. If you experienced any of that, then you qualify as having suffered trauma. What's the difference between trauma and complex post-traumatic stress disorder? Well, you're going to have a post-traumatic stress response to any of the things that I listed here, but it becomes a complex post-traumatic stress disorder when it occurred over a long period of time. It was a situation where you had no control over domestic violence, childhood abuse. Whether it's cPTSD or PTSD, it's trauma. And that thing could be playing out in our current lives without our even recognizing that that's what's going on. So I just wanted to share a couple of those stories with you and to encourage you that if you've been through anything like that, that you might need to seek some kind of therapy. If you're seeing yourself experience repetitive negative patterns in your life, then it might be a direct result of having gone through some kind of trauma that you might need to deal with so that you can break that cycle. I hope this was helpful to you today. I'm Dr. Linda F. Williams, and you know what I'm going to say. Always remember that your greatest power is realizing the truth of who you are. Know that truth.